the voluntary decision in the hands of the private sector. That's why this argument that the private sector could do it better is so nonsensical. It is the refusal of the private sector to fully participate in this program in its full spirit that's been the problem. Yes. Yes.
Are you in favor of the amendment or opposed to the amendment?
I am indifferent. Well, I'm against the amendment. I take it back. I am against the amendment because I had to be against the amendment to get the time to speak. So I am against the amendment.
All right.
But I'm not against the amendment on substantive grounds. I'm against it on aesthetic grounds. I hate to clutter things up with an amendment that doesn't do anything. But let me go back to the substance. The substance is that we have a false claim that this is because of the taxpayers, when the TARP will make sure that it doesn't come out of the taxpayers, the TARP legislation. And members who vote to send money, $1.2 billion, to build up the security forces of Iraq, please don't have them tell me, Mr. Chairman, that they're for efficient spending. The security forces in Iraq. How about Afghan infrastructure? Majority voted to send money to Afghanistan for infrastructure. There's a great mark of efficiency.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conseco. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in Part A of House Report 112-34. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To offer the amendment as the designee of Mr. Inslee of Washington.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-34, offered by Mr. Miller of North Carolina.
Just a second.
I'm sorry.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller, and a member opposed will control 5 minutes. Now the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to assure the gentleman from Texas that if he's worried about the debt burden that children being born today face, with respect to this program, unless one of those children takes a job on Wall Street within the next 2 years, like the talking baby and the E-Trade ads, they really are not going to have to pay for this program. This program is going to come to the financial sector. That was a promise made in the TARP legislation, and unless they plan to break that promise, and I'm beginning to get the feeling that they are, this is not going to be something borne, a cost borne by innocent taxpayers, but by the industry that created the mess. Now, many people have criticized the TARP program, including me. The Congressional Oversight Panel has, the Special Inspector General for the TARP program. Yes, a lot of people have criticized the program. Unlike Republicans, a lot of us have been trying to figure out a way to make it work. I have offered several suggestions. I have criticized it continuously for 2 years and said what we should be doing instead. And on what we should be doing instead, there has been a deafening silence from Republicans. We know we can do something. We know we have to do something. The foreclosures and the drop in home values are grinding down the middle class. The value they have in the home, the equity they have in their home is the bulk of their life savings. So when their home goes down in value, their life savings go away. We have got to get control of this. We know we can make something work because we have before. One of the most successful programs in the New Deal got control of the foreclosure crisis then, and the federal government made a profit from the program. This program, and there is reason to think that there will be real rules, real enforceable rules soon. There are settlement talks pending on enforcement action by states' attorney generals and by the federal agencies for the violations of law by the biggest banks that handle most of these mortgages, which Republicans have opposed. And there are rules in the offing from the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which they have also proposed, something that really will make this work. Mr. Inslee's amendment is much the same. It requires a pullback, a hard look at the program. What will make it work? What are the guidelines that need to make it work? What are the standards that need to make it work? And it requires that those suggested changes be implemented in the program. I urge the adoption of the amendment.
The gentleman reserves his time. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment, I rise in opposition to it. I think it's a fundamentally flawed amendment. What this amendment essentially does is say that the last agency in government that we'd asked to conduct a review of this program would be in charge of the review of the program and would be in charge of designing a new program, even though the previous program they designed is flawed and harmful and a failure, and immediately report back to Congress a program that is basically the same. Look, Ronald Reagan once said the closest thing to eternal life is a federal program. That quote is this amendment. I ask my colleagues to oppose it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Yes, I would say that if you read a quote from the Special Inspector General from TARP, Mr. Borowski, the basic idea of a well-run government program is to have clear goals, have a plan to meet these goals, measure progress along the way against these goals, change your program when necessary so you can still achieve those goals. But this is how the TARP has been implemented, and in particular, this program within TARP. Set goals, ignore goals entirely, hope for the best. When the best is different, change your goals and say you never really meant it when you had those goals. Pretend that the program is a success even though it is not meeting these goals. That is Mr. Borowski's analysis of Treasury's implementation. I would ask my colleague if that is in keeping with his expectations for a new government program. I submit that that's what they'll come up with. This Treasury has defended TARP and defended HAMP, in particular HAMP, which has been roundly criticized, even by La Raza, which has been tried and true liberal activists for a long time. But they've been defending it. Why? I'm not sure. But instead of reforming the program, instead of fixing the program, they refuse to do it, and so we must end it. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yields back. Both sides having yielded back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5, printed in Part A of House Report 112-34. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to H.R. 839 at the desk that is numbered 5.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-34, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of my amendment, which is a common-sense provision that provides transparency and clarity for distressed homeowners. My amendment would require the Secretary of the Treasury to send a letter to HAMP applicants that they will not be considered for a modification due to termination of the program, and that they can contact their member of Congress for assistance in negotiating with or acquiring a loan modification from their servicer. I raise this amendment because my friends on the opposite side of the aisle have the majority in the House, and they will probably prevail on this amendment. But I think that we have a responsibility to say to our constituents what we're doing and what we're not doing. Many of them have just begun to learn about the loan modification program, the HAMP program, and all of a sudden it's going to be pulled out from under them if this amendment prevails and if it passes on the opposite side of the aisle and in the Senate, etc. And they need to know The constituents need to know exactly what we've done. Now, I worked with Mr. McHenry on this amendment, and we worked out some language that he thought was fair, and I believe we do have his support. That's not to say that I support the bill, because I don't support this amendment. I don't support this amendment that would literally dismantle the hemp program. Yes, there are criticisms about this program. I and others would have liked for it to have been broader, for it to have helped more people, but don't forget, over 600,000 people have been helped. I know the target was 3 to 4 million people, and we certainly haven't come close to that. But to do away with this program would lead the American taxpayers who have gotten into loans, oftentimes tricked into these loans, misled into these loans by the loan initiators, the banks and the mortgage companies that told them that they could help them get a mortgage, even though these were exotic products, these were teaser loans, these were no-doc loans, these were loans that were going to reset and cause the taxpayer to be in a loan that they could not afford. Many innocent people trying to live the American dream signed on the dotted line, and also there was a lot of fraud involved, where some of these loan initiators signed on the dotted line for the homeowner or the would-be homeowner. And so we have this crisis, this subprime crisis that we have been going through, and there's a lot of misery out there, and people who just tried to own a home who now find themselves in foreclosure. The banks were not helping with loan modification, so we had to come up with something. The administration came up with the HAMP program. It's a voluntary program, but they signed on to these agreements with the banks to say that they would do loan modifications under certain conditions. And the administration had to do this because the banks were not helping out the homeowners. As a matter of fact, the banks say, well, we don't have anything to do with this anymore. It's up to the servicers. What a lot of people don't know is, who is this servicer? The servicer is simply, in most cases, a company that's owned by the banks. They own their own servicing companies, which means that once the mortgage is signed on by the homeowner, they now give it to this other company that they own, these servicers, and the servicers have the responsibility for collecting on the mortgage, for collecting on late fees, for collecting on attorney fees, and for doing loan modifications. But the homeowners couldn't get to them. HAMP is supposed to help them get to them. These services have gotten away with being unregulated for all of these years. As a matter of fact, there are no standards for services. You call one bank, they will send you to their loss mitigation department. What they don't tell you, a bank such as Bank of America, that loss mitigation is an offshore operation. You may be talking to somebody in India who's got this little cookie-cutter sheet who says, how much money do you make? How many times have you been late on your payment? Let's figure out how not to give you a loan modification, but maybe to give you a few months to catch up. But loss mitigation means a lot of different things in all of these different banks. If you are lucky enough to get to the servicer,
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I would just simply ask for support, for transparency, and support to keep this program going. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
I claim time in opposition, even though I'm not
Without-
opposed to the amendment.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just have a question for the sponsor of this amendment. You've had several amendments in several of these bills, and I wondered if I just wanted to make sure that this is the same as what you and Mr. McHenry agreed to.
Yes.
Okay.
This is absolutely the same thing that we agreed
Okay.
to.
And you're just asking for this amendment, not to change the bill or anything.
I beg your pardon?
You're just asking for support of this amendment and not for anything concerning the bill.
This amendment is a transparency amendment that I worked on with Mr. McHenry, where our constituents would be notified and have an opportunity to
Reclaiming my
contact
time.
us. Yes.
We accept the amendment.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields
I
back.
yield back my time.
All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part A of House Report 112-34. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-34, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman very much, and I thank my colleagues very much as well. As we come to the floor of the House, I know that members on both sides of the aisles are committed to knowing the facts. We want to know the facts when we go to town hall meetings, when our constituents pose very deliberative questions. We want to give them numbers. We want to be able to reason with them. And one of the deliberative aspects of legislation is that you fix it, you don't end it. And so I rise today to ask my colleagues to support our amendment, an amendment that I think makes common sense. It's an amendment that thoughtful members can support. It's an amendment that whether you are Republican or Democrat, you want to know what works. My amendment would call on the Secretary of Treasury to commission a study that would identify what aspects of the HAMP program were successful and effectively carried out the original intent of the program. It would then require the Secretary to issue a report to Congress containing all findings and determinations of the study and legislative recommendations for a new mortgage modification program that could more successfully and effectively achieve the original purpose of the Home Affordable Modification Program. We have to thank the administration for recognizing that people were literally on their knees. There is no doubt that we have different philosophies, and friends on the other side of the aisle. They keep talking about the deficit and the depressing aspect of the trillion-dollar debt. We keep talking about invest and grow the economy. When you grow the economy, you have the ability to pay down on your debt. You have the ability to address the question of the debt ceiling. And so my question is, why wouldn't you want to know the best practices? Let me give you some of the myths that have been represented. One suggestion is that this legislation that we have before us to end the HAMP program will prevent another $30 billion from going to one of these programs. That is inaccurate. The repeal of this program will, in essence, save only $1.437 billion. That's all that it will save. But more importantly, what you will have is you will throw homeowners into the streets when their major asset for Americans, middle-class, hardworking Americans, is their home. Let's find out the best practices and make this work. The monthly rate of new loan approval would have to triple in order to approximate the amount cited by the chairman of this committee, suggesting $30 billion. Actually, we expect the rates are instead likely to modestly decline. So you're not going to have that much savings, and it's not going to, in essence, blow up with so many people using it that you're going to use this amount of money. One Republican has suggested that for every dollar that the program goes to private lenders, well, for every dollar that the HAMP program has paid out, homeowners have received from lenders $5 in reduced mortgage payments. Most of the program funds do not go to lenders, but go directly to homeowners as incentives on the on-time mortgage payments. It is giving individuals a leg up. It is interesting that we would not want to focus on the best practices when, if you look at this map, you will see that every single state has a HAMP impact. Someone has a mortgage problem that the HAMP program has helped. Now, can we fix it? Yes, we can make it better. But let me tell this to a person by the name of Laurel. She indicated about how this program has helped her. Well, my income has not fully come back. She was unemployed. I am making much less than I was making before, so it's been a difficult time. With the modification, my mortgage payment has gone down $800, and I'm able to make my payment on time. I have been able to remain in the home that I love and that has provided me with great stability. I'm extremely grateful that I received the modification. She has saved an asset that contributes to the economy. What would be the results of ending the modification program? I can tell you what the results would be. The results would be that Laurel would have dump another home onto the market that no one could buy, that would bring down the income or bring down the quality of the neighborhood and the house appraisal prices of the neighborhood, and therefore add another, if you will, dent to this economy. Invest and grow. And the question is, all of my friends who are there on the other side of the aisle, here's a document that's 15 pages long that shows that your districts, your cities have been impacted positively by the HAMP program. Job growth is picking up. Invest and grow jobs should be the mindset of the American Congress, for that's what we were sent back to Washington to do. There is no doubt that we have a collective commitment to bringing down the debt. There is a collective commitment to doing that. And we can look reasonably at what and how to do it. But when you don't even have the best practices or know why you're repealing something, and right now people are in the middle of addressing this question of modifying their mortgage, I ask my colleagues to support my amendment because it does, in fact, provide a lifeline, and it invests in the economy, creates jobs, and stabilizes the middle-class, hardworking Americans.
What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman
Mr.
is
Chairman?
recognized in opposition for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what my colleague from Texas has heard at her town hall meetings, but what I've heard from my constituents. I have one resident of Stanley, North Carolina, who said, quote, "We've paid payments every month." Now, I'd say to my colleague, I've read this before, but I wasn't sure if you're on the floor for this. But one constituent of mine said, "We've paid payments every month, but now we're being told we're behind in our payments because it's not the original monthly payment on our original loan, but it's the amount we were told to pay in 2010. How can we be behind?" I'd ask my colleague to read the Special Inspector General's report, the details of failures of HAMP. I ask my colleagues to listen to their constituents, who more people in America, I would remind my colleagues, more people in America, close to 800,000 Americans, have been actively harmed and left worse off under this federal program than have actually been helped. My colleague points to a laudable survey of the positives. The survey doesn't detail the destroyed lives that this HAMP program has pushed on people, has created. So this amendment, the reason why I rise in opposition is because this amendment is similar to ones we've had in committee that we rejected in committee. This directs the Treasury to conduct a study of HAMP and would be completely counterproductive. The reason why it would be completely counterproductive is over the last 6 months we've seen the Treasury Department engage in a frantic 6-month media campaign for this program. They won't admit it's a failure, although the rest of the world is largely saying it's a failure. They even have offered a veto threat on this legislation. The Special Inspector General, Mr. Borofsky, said just earlier this week, this Treasury Department is so content with the wretched, shameful status quo, they refuse to even acknowledge that this program is a failure. And that's why simply to offer the Treasury to study this really is beneath the House. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask how much time is remaining on both sides.
The gentleman from North Carolina has 2.5 minutes.
The gentleman yield?
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, gentlewoman from Texas.
I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part A of House Report 112-34. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-34, offered by Ms. Matsui of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Matsui, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to offer an amendment to H.R. 839, the HAMP Termination Act, that calls on mortgage lenders to continue to publicly report basic home loan modification information. Because of the amendment I offered to the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which passed the House unanimously last Congress, mortgage lenders and services participating in the Home Affordable Modification Program are required to report basic loan modification information to the Department of the Treasury. Due to the enactment of my amendment, we now know that 2.5 million Americans have applied to participate in the Home Affordable Modification Program, and well over 600,000 of those applicants began permanent modifications. In the Sacramento region, over 9,000 of the nearly 12,000 homeowners who have applied for permanent modifications have been approved, providing assistance to thousands of homeowners in my district. This information is crucial to accountability and transparency, and for this Congress to measure the performance of the mortgage industry. The amendment I offer today requires the same basic home loan modification reporting to continue, such as the number of applications they receive, the number of applications processed, or the number of modifications they approve or deny. In its current form, H.R. 839 would eliminate HAMP, and as a result, financial institutions who receive HAMP taxpayer funds would no longer be obligated to continue reporting such basic information to the public. Mr. Chairman, the foreclosure crisis was the root cause of the dire economic situation. It led to the near collapse of our financial system, increased unemployment, and caused a housing and credit crisis. Sadly, there are still millions of American homeowners facing foreclosure, and my home district of Sacramento, California, has been hit especially hard by this crisis. During the last few years, I've been to foreclosure workshops in my district where I've met with constituents who are facing losing their home. I was recently contacted by Joan, a constituent of mine, who would have lost her house without assistance from HAMP. Joan paid her bills on time and was current on her mortgage when her son was diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder that rendered him unable to work. When her adult son moved in with her shortly after, Joan was no longer able to provide for him and make her mortgage payments at the same time and sought assistance. With proper assistance, Joan received a low-interest rate HAMP loan and now is able to once again make her mortgage payments on time. Joan shared with me that her home was saved due to the HAMP program and that her son would have been homeless without it. She said that, and I quote, "I have no words to express my feelings of gratitude for my loan modification." Mr. Chairman, I've heard a number of significant similar stories in Sacramento. It is essential that we require lenders to continue to report the loan modification activities. We need to know how many Joans are out there struggling but seeking assistance. We need to know whether lenders are doing all they can. Mr. Chairman, this amendment will ensure that a level of transparency and accountability will continue. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense transparency amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Balance of her time. Who seeks recognition? What purpose
I
does
rise
the
in
gentleman
opposition.
from North Carolina rise?
I rise in opposition to the
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentlelady offering this amendment. Unfortunately, I must rise in opposition to it. The requirements in this amendment are both cumbersome and unnecessary. It requires servicers and lenders to provide information regarding proprietary information on their entire portfolio of loans, not just HAMP. The reporting requirement for, quote, requests for modification, end quote, is undefined in the amendment and is therefore unworkable based on the research that we've done. It's unclear why this new role is necessary in the contractual negotiations between private citizens and private companies. Furthermore, servicers already provide results of their modification efforts to the Hope Now Alliance, as well as in their annual reports, without disclosing proprietary information. In fact, the Hope Now Alliance reports servicers having completed 961,355 proprietary modifications in 2008, 1,172,490 proprietary modifications in 2009, 1.2 million in 2010. Now, I might add, this is many multiples in the private sector in terms of mortgage modifications than have been provided under the HAMP government-funded program that we're discussing here today and trying to eliminate here today. The program that has hurt about 800,000, just shy of 800,000 Americans, destroyed their credit, taking their savings, and at the end of the day, taking their homes. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote against this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that these basic reporting requirements are not new. It's about HAMP. Every financial institution receiving HAMP funds from the TARP program is currently required to report this information today. And the current industry reporting requirements have played a significant role in providing a sense of transparency and accountability. And that's what we're talking about, transparency and accountability in our efforts to help homeowners and stabilize our housing market. Requiring basic information to be reported will provide this Congress with the information to make future decisions on loan modification programs, as well as monitor the performance of the mortgage industry. Mr. Chairman, I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this important amendment to bring clarity and transparency to the mortgage industry, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back the remainder of her time. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
In closing, I would encourage my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. The reporting requirements my colleague references are required by the servicers that are participating in HAMP, and they're required to disclose the information related to the federal program HAMP. So this amendment goes much further and requires these servicers to disclose hundreds of thousands of other modifications that are in the private sector. We know the aggregate number. What is being requested here is detailed information that is not correct for personal privacy and is not proper in keeping with the hundreds of thousands of private transactions going on across this country. I'd urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Both sides having yielded back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in Part A of House Report 112-34. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 8, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-34, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, for everyone who cares about the issues of poverty, housing, economic growth, and community life, the last couple of weeks have brought some troubling news. Wednesday came the news that purchases of new U.S. homes declined last month to the slowest pace on record, and new home prices dropped to the lowest level since December 2003. And yet, over the past 2 weeks, House Republicans have said with their votes again and again that their policy to help homeowners is to just give up, to throw in the towel and say that there's just nothing that Congress can do or will do to address the problem to help struggling American families. They have already voted to terminate 3 federal programs that help Americans who are struggling stay in their homes. And now we are considering yet another one that has helped more than 32,000 New Yorkers stay in their homes, over 600,000 across our great country. And what bothers me is that they are leading the effort to eliminate these programs, voting against them, and yet they have no plans of their own to address the foreclosure crisis that is hurting neighborhoods and disrupting lives throughout their country. Like the jobs bills they said they would have, we have yet to see them. And the only initiative to help housing is to eliminate the programs that are already there. Now, the HAMP program has been successful in helping, as I said, over 600,000, and with over 30,000 mortgages modified each month nationally, HAMP is continuing to provide relief to struggling families across this country. My amendment will add findings to the bill with the number of trial and permanent modifications stated under the HAMP program. The findings will also state the number of seriously delinquent mortgages in the U.S. that may be eligible for HAMP modifications, but won't be because the program is being terminated. I believe it is important for the public to understand, state by state, the number of mortgages, the number of families who are still in their homes because of the HAMP program. Families are saving an average of over $500 per month on their mortgage payments. This amounts to nearly $5 billion in savings since the program started. These are real families and real savings. If our friends who have proposed to terminate this program want to talk about savings, they should think about the number of people in these states who have benefited from HAMP and are now saving money every single month. They should also think about the number of seriously delinquent mortgages out there that are on the verge of foreclosure. Currently, over 2 million families in our country are in this situation. Many of these could be eligible to participate in the HAMP program, but by terminating it now, our friends are saying that these families are on their own. The numbers speak for themselves, and I think it is important that we highlight how we have helped families across this country and how many more are not helping, are not going to be helped or are not being helped by terminating and closing this program. So I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and to oppose the underlying bill. And I would like to place in the record a statement of administration policy from the Executive Office of President Barack Obama in support of the HAMP program, urging a no vote on the efforts by the Republican majority to terminate a program that is
The General Lady's request will be covered by general leave.
Okay, thank you. I reserve the balance of my time.
The General Lady reserves the balance of her time. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from North Carolina.
I seek
For what
recognition.
purpose do you rise?
I rise in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment fails to highlight that there are more failed modifications than successful permanent modifications. In fact, in the dissenting views from the Financial Service Committee Democrats, of which my colleague from New York, Ms. Maloney, signed along with 14 of her Democrat colleagues, it states that, in their view, 570,000 homeowners would be assisted under HAMP if the program were allowed to continue. This amendment, however, states that that number is 2.8 million. This differs from the facts of her own party, and I think both numbers are much higher than would have been agreed upon by the Congressional Oversight Panel of TARP. Their numbers are much, much lower. I think if you use her words, my colleague's words and figures, it's fair to say that those are grossly inflated and go well beyond what is reasonable, what is serious, and what is agreed upon in the private sector or by even most of her Democrat colleagues. And so I would urge my colleagues to vote against that. And I retain the balance of my time in my tongue-tied way.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentlelady from New York.
The number of over 2 million delinquent mortgages in the United States is the range of people that could be eligible, who could apply for the program. But not all of them would qualify. You have to reach certain standards to qualify to enter the program. So this is the range of people who could be helped. The difficulty with my Republican colleagues is that they have no alternative. They are abolishing a program without coming forward with any idea to help themselves. And as Mark Zandi said in his recent report, housing remains fragile in America, and housing is roughly 25% of our economy. So to the extent that we can help people stay in their homes, thereby not only helping that family, but helping their community and helping their country, helping to stabilize the housing prices around that house so it doesn't become delinquent and abandoned, pulling down the values in the communities. This is an important program, and it should be continued. It's no taxpayer dollars used. It's from the HAMP. It's from the TARP program, funded by the banks. And so this is an effort to help the overall economy, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, you said the lady's time has expired?
Lady's time has expired.
All right. In closing, I would quote from page 17 of the dissenting views of the Financial Service Committee Democrats, of which my colleague, Ms. Maloney, signed on. Page 17. A reasonable estimate is that the program participation will double by the end of next year, which I might add is a bit ambitious. But I'll just continue with the quote. A reasonable estimate is that the program participation will double by the end of next year for a cumulative total of 1.1 million homeowners. Based on this estimate, the bill would deny modification for more than 500,000 homeowners at risk of foreclosure. I might add, the statistics also bear out that for every 500,000 that are helped in this program, you're actively hurting about 800,000 Americans. So what the opposition on the other side of the aisle is doing is saying we should continue failure, we should endorse failure. In fact, we should continue to hurt people by keeping this program open, and that under their view, it means that you'll have 800,000 Americans that will be left worse off because this program exists. Worse off, their credit depleted, their home taken, their credit rating destroyed. I think that is highly inappropriate, Mr. Chairman. That's why I oppose this amendment, and I yield my colleague from Illinois the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. My colleague from New York and many of the colleagues from that side of the aisle have been talking about the fact that, or saying that if you end these if we end this program, there will be nothing, and that simply isn't true. Of the 4.1 million mortgage modifications that were completed, 3.5 million were done by the private sector with no government program and not a dime from the taxpayers. And there's also the Home Affordable Refinance Program, HARP, for homeowners with government-backed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans. And don't forget about the Hardest Hit Fund. According to the Treasury website, the President established this in February 2010 to provide targeted aid to families in states hard hit by the economic and housing market downturn. That includes $1.5 million went to the hardest hit states, California, Arizona, Florida, Nevada, and Michigan. Another $600 million went to another set, North Carolina, Ohio, Rhode Island, and South Carolina. And finally, $2 billion were distributed to 17 states in the District of Columbia. In 2008, $300 million in guarantees was committed for Hope for Homeowners, a voluntary FHA program. Only 200 loans have been modified in this program, but it does exist. $475 million have been appropriated to Neighborhood Works for foreclosure counseling for homeowners. And finally, there are countless local, state, and private sector initiatives. So we cannot have we have to stop funding programs that don't work with money that we don't have. Let's make that clear, and with that I would urge opposition to this amendment and yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from New York will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part A of House Report 11234. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer my amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 9, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-34, offered by Ms. Loretta Sanchez of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 170, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Sanchez, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Chairman,
the gentlewoman yield for unanimous consent.
I will yield for unanimous consent.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. Mr. Chairman, it's with great regret but with clear intent that I rise in opposition to continuing the federal Home Affordable Modification Program known as HAMP without significant changes. HAMP was designed to help millions of homeowners who have fallen victim to the financial crisis of 2008 and the collapse of the housing market, but regrettably at this time it is not working under its current structure. I thank the gentlewoman for yielding.
Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, since my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are ending the Home Affordable Modification Program, my amendment simply states that the Congress encourages the banks to provide our qualifying neighbors with loan modifications. It also encourages the banks to provide our friends and family with information on foreclosure prevention and loan modifications. My Republican colleagues say that the Home Affordable Modification Program is not helping enough people. Well, it didn't help all the people, that's true. I know people who went and tried to get their homes, their loans modified, and it didn't work for them. But there have been quite a few who have been helped. I want to give you some examples just in my own area. For example, there was this couple in Garden Grove, California, and the husband became unemployed. He was a construction worker, and as we all know, construction was the first industry to fold. Well, the family fell behind on their mortgage payments despite the fact that they're extremely frugal and had been saving money for emergencies. After some time, the husband found a job. Of course, it paid less, and they're still unable to pay their full mortgage. They owed $8,825 in missed payments with late fees, plus they had a balance of $482,000 on their mortgage. And thanks to the modification program, the debts were forgiven, and the balance was dropped by $87,000, so they have a new balance. Even with the loss of income, they're very thankful that they can keep their home and that they have a mortgage payment that they can make. The Home Affordable Modification Program allowed this family to keep their home. A family from Santa Ana was close to losing their home due to financial hardship as the husband's hours and income were reduced. So to make ends meet, he supplemented his primary job with a part-time job. These are not people who are asking for a handout. These are people who are trying to figure out a way to hold on to their home and to keep stability with their children. The gentleman really wanted to keep his home, and so he worked with a counseling agency to formulate a budget that was affordable to him. And thanks to the loan modification program, his payment was reduced, and the family can stay in their home. That's one more family in Santa Ana that is in their home today. Then there was this couple who worked for a school district, and the budget restraints in the state forced them to have furloughs, which took a significant toll on their income. There were a couple from Anaheim. They were using their unused sick and vacation days just so they could get that check in order to make the mortgage. Thanks to the loan modification program, the couple was able to permanently modify their loans and to keep their home. Their monthly mortgage payment was reduced. It made it more affordable. And even with income reduction, this is another couple, another family that is still in their home. That's only 3 of the success stories we've had. Maybe, I know that I have worked very hard with my housing agencies
and with people and putting on forums and talking to people and giving information and calling them in and getting the banks in and trying to modify these loans. This is a 5-year process at home that we have been working on. I don't know, maybe the rest of my colleagues didn't do this or didn't know how to do it or they weren't as successful, but we have had success. So, we have families who are in their homes. It's my hope that my Republican colleagues will reconsider this bill. Let's work together to find solutions for people, because when you keep a family in their home, the stability of the family stays intact. When you have that, in particular if you have children, they need that stability. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment, even though I am not opposed.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. We would accept the amendment. You know, I have had similar occurrences in my district, and have where actually one gentleman had to spend or pay back $42,000 with the late fees and the penalties and the difference between the loan modification. And that's why I think that this program has failed. But I think that your amendment, which is a sense of Congress, for Congress to encourage the banks to work with our constituents to provide loan modifications to those that are eligible. And it also encourages banks to work with our constituents to provide them with the best services and to assist them in prospective homeowners with foreclosure prevention and counseling. I think this is a help in the private sector and encourage the private sector to do this, and so we would accept that amendment. And I would yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee now rise.
Question is on the motion. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The committee rises.
Chairman. House will be in order. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 839, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 839 and has come to no resolution thereon. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
The House today worked on just 2 bills. One extends certain federal aviation programs. They voice voted approval of that earlier. And they've spent the bulk of the day debating